Okay, in respect of everybody's time, I think we'll get started. So very, very happy to have folks join us online and in the room here on Bannatyne campus. I am very happy and honored to welcome our guest today, Dr. Sarah Ousmane from University of Saskatchewan, where she's an associate professor in the physiotherapy department. Sarah comes to this topic with much lived experience in working with our Indigenous relations, and I will let her take her own introduction from there.
Awesome. Thanks, Moni, and thanks everybody for joining online and the crowd in person here in this great theater. So yeah, I really appreciate this opportunity to share, and I know I was visiting with a few folks here on curriculum-related things, so always lots to talk about. And thanks for the intro, Moni. I do want to recognize and acknowledge the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and any peoples in the homeland of the Métis here in Winnipeg, and recognize as a guest here, it's important for that, recognition of the first peoples of these lands and the gratitude that I have as I enter these spaces as a person from, from away. Definitely respecting the treaties that were made on these territories, acknowledging the harms, mistakes of the past, and as noted on the slide here, dedicating ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. And more on a personal note for me, a commitment to decolonizing my thinking, my practice, and try to exemplify that in the work that I do with the research partnerships that I have. And yeah, I'm a first-generation Canadian settler, critical ally, co-liberator, whatever word is your choice at this point. But I think the most important piece is that I definitely have benefited from growing up on the traditional territories of, and I wasn't sure if I had another slide for this, but traditional territories of the Cree, the Dene, the Dakota, Nakota, and the homeland of the Métis, where I reside in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, and come from the University of Saskatchewan here. So a nice wintry day. Patty's in New Zealand, so I don't think she's very disappointed having to miss today's weather. But with the cold comes a lot of time for introspection and recognizing the strengths of what the seasons bring, even when we have to bundle up. So. I threw a few quick presentation objectives here. Hopefully I'll sort of hit some of these as I go. And I wasn't sure I don't know everybody online and what background people have. So there may be things that, given the timeline that I have, I might sort of go over fairly quickly, but I'm happy to loop back if people have questions later on. So I'm not going to read these out, but basically we'll be sharing some of the theoretical frameworks and theories that we use to inform and drive our research projects and program of research. And then I'll give you a few examples of some of the projects that I'm working on and how hopefully you'll see how we exemplify and I exemplify a practice of decolonization in the spirit of reconciliation within the research that I do. And of course, being on faculty in the School of Rehab Science, I have the opportunity and I think the privilege of bringing what I learn with and from and by community into my teaching with the hope of supporting future physical therapy students to work on their own decolonizing, self-decolonizing practice and be the next generation of healthcare providers who can support dismantling racism in our health system. But I won't probably get into too much of that today. So I think the first most important piece is why is it important that the decolonizing and research happens? And I know that I'm in Winnipeg, like what a great place, and I'm very envious of the government that you have at the moment. there's so many things around as I've been spending time, reminders of the importance of and the presence and the visibility of Indigenous peoples here. So that's been really, really exciting. And I think Saskatchewan and Manitoba have very similar population demographics. So first of all, populations require that we do things differently. We know that by 2045, it's anticipated that the Indigenous here Aboriginal population, because of the reference I'm using, will make up 33% of the general population. And I know that these are very similar statistics to Manitoba. We have generally, the Indigenous population in Saskatchewan is younger. And it's, I think current stats say 31.5% of the total Indigenous population in Saskatchewan are 14 years or younger, as compared to 17.6% in the non-Indigenous population. And so we are, as healthcare providers, as researchers, as scholars, have a responsibility to recognizing why this is important and how we need to reframe approaches to the work that we do. We know that the Indigenous population life expectancy is generally equitably shorter. However, there is a trend towards aging, and we're seeing more and more of that. And we all know just general aging, there's health challenges that come with it. And so as healthcare providers and as health researchers and intervention health researchers, there's a real need to decolonize how we're doing this work so we can better meet the needs of the people we're working with and provide relevant, meaningful impacts to the work that we do. This is a statistic from some time ago, but it generally shows a 43% increase in the number of Aboriginal adults aged 65 years and over that happened between 2001 and 2006. And I think this trend is continuing. You know, we also are seeing it in the general population, the increased trend to aging. And we know that this actually is going to put different approaches and priorities to healthcare provision, but also to the research, health intervention research that we're doing. Yeah, so I'll go really quick. We know health inequities exist. They exist across the lifespan. Again, an older statistic here, but 7% of Aboriginal adults aged 55 to 64 back in 2010 reported 3 or more chronic conditions, compared to 2% of the general Canadian population. And here we're seeing 51% of Aboriginal Indigenous adults aged 75 years or older report 3 or more chronic conditions, in comparison to 25% among the non-Indigenous populations. And again, these are old statistics, so these disparities continue to exist, and they're not going away. And we have to really take a look at what our responsibility is, to work collaboratively, collectively, and most importantly, decolonize how we're approaching things so that we can be part of solution seeking in partnership with communities, Indigenous communities. And just really quick, rehab folks know this. We have these opportunities to maximize and optimize health through development throughout all stages of our life. And we hit adult life, and depending on complex factors in our world, our age-related decline can actually happen gradually or more rapidly, depending on our historical health in our lived experience throughout our lifespan, and actually can becomes more evident with disparities in these inequities as people get into the older adult years, and you can see that by the graph here. So this is sort of what grounds and drives a lot of the rationale for this work. And the complex constellation of factors that drive these health inequities, all of the things that I just shared with you, are because of distinctive, complex, layered reasons. And I want to just point out colonization, systemic racism, discrimination, lack of culturally safe care, access to care, and access to safe care, along with intergenerational trauma, are all these really, really important factors that if we aren't mindful of them, we will continue to perpetuate the harm that has happened historically and currently today. So these are all the things I think about, and I won't spend a lot of time here, but colonization is a unique, distinctive determinant of health, and we need to decolonize in order to find ways to mitigate the impacts of colonization that continue to play out presently. Here I am in Winnipeg, so Truth and Reconciliation is a topic that I think is probably very well versed here. And as many of you probably already know, 94 calls to action and this commitment to establishing and maintaining mutually respectful relationships. So you're going to see as I talk through the next little bit, relationships are essential and they are critical to all of the work that I do. And we ground all that we do as much as we can in a relational approach to our research. And of course, we've got UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, as another big guiding document. So TRC, UNDRIP. So these are all things, reasons, and really important documents that provide the rationale for why it is absolutely essential that we decolonize what we're doing in the research world. We have a responsibility to take action, and it can't be done individually. We do need to do this collectively and collaboratively to dismantle racism in all pillars of our lives, including research, and that's kind of what I'm hoping to be here to share a little bit about. So how am I, how are we? I do often use we because this work that I do is not me, it's a team. I happen to be leading it, but we're very thoughtful about who is leading, and I co-lead it. But in the Western kind of framing of things, this is kind of where I spend my time. So, and we definitely try to do our due diligence to work in meaningful, respectful, relational ways, to learn how to bring Indigenous values to underpin our research frameworks. I'll talk a little bit about that today. How we use participatory action research methodology to create these opportunities for the middle ground, the ethical space, which I'm also going to talk about, and how we apply the 5 R's of respect, responsibility, reciprocity, relevance, and relationships in the work that we do. So this is one of the frameworks that we use. This is Cindy Blackstock's Breath of Life theory and ecological framework. And it's a very busy slide, so I'm sorry, but it's just a quick image to show that we've taken some of the work that Cindy Blackstock, as an Indigenous scholar, proposed, Breath of Life. And what she talks about is there's essential teachings, ancestral teachings that get passed down from the older generation to the younger generation. And at the same time, within an Indigenous ecological framework, looking at the spheres of spiritual, emotional, physical, and cognitive spheres, how there's an interplay of all of these that support and promote wellness among Indigenous populations across the lifespan. There's a lot in here, but what we've done with our work and our research to date is taken a Western population health intervention research model that was co-created by a team of researchers that I work with at the Saskatchewan Population Health and Evaluation Research Unit. It's a mouthful. We say SPHERU for short. And we take an intervention research model, but instead of having that as our pillar and grounding, we are grounding everything in the Breath of Life theory and then finding ways to decolonize and inform some of the other really important pillars that allow us to create new knowledge in the middle ground. And so the orange, sort of yellowy orange additions here is actually informed by previous research we've done with a Métis community of Alacrosse and bringing in a Métis worldview on this as well. So I'm happy to discuss this later. I won't spend a lot more time there, but just so that you understand and recognize that this already is grounding our work in a elevating and honoring Breath of Life theory ecological framework, and then as we're able, filtering in elements of population health intervention research so that everything we do from the ground up is Indigenous driven as much as possible. We do have Métis co-leads and Indigenous knowledge keepers on all of our projects. And so we're constantly revisiting these and just trying to make sure that we're staying on task and alignment with Indigenous perspectives, worldview, and knowledge. The other important theoretical underpinning is Willie Ermine's ethical space. So Willie Ermine is an elder from Sturgeon Lake, Saskatchewan, and he's got some really great work out there that you may be interested in reading, but talks about the ethical space as being the middle of that Venn diagram where we can come together recognizing that there's distinctive differences in the way that we do and think and practice, but there's deeper levels of thoughts and assumptions that we don't always bring forward, or they're hidden and they can actually continue to bubble up, and cause disruption and harm if, as Western trained thinkers, we're not taking that step back to recognize that they exist. And then it's the suggestion that within this ethical space, or this common ground or middle ground, that the deeper levels can be acknowledged, that there's transparency there, and that new knowledge emerges from that is grounded in a decolonized process. Theoretical. And hopefully when I go through the exemplars of the research, you'll see how we're trying to actually exemplify and apply these pillars. And as I said before, the reconciliation, we follow very closely the 5 R's. As you can see here, respect, reciprocity, relevance, responsibility, and relationships grounded in safety and humility. It's constant. I'm always learning, and I'm always trying to just bring awareness to the missteps that I know that I do make, and I work with amazing Indigenous colleagues who are very, very patient and remind me a lot. But we're getting into some really good work now because we've been working together for some time. So the first example, just want to watch my time, is a newer project that we're one of 4 teams across Canada that's been funded through CIHR, and it's a team diabetes project. Our project is called Strong Bodies, Spirits, Minds, and Voices: Indigenous Knowledge Guiding Pediatric Type 2 Diabetes Prevention with and among First Nation, Nation and Métis communities in Saskatchewan. There's several of us as co-leads on this, and it's really, really important for me to recognize Gilbert Cuestep, Margaret Larocque, Judy Pelly, Liz DeRocher, TJ Roy as some of the key Soto, Cree, Métis, community voices and elders, knowledge keepers, and cultural advisors on this project. It's pretty big. There's 35 of us on the team. And I'll talk a little bit about the process of getting to the grant, because it'll show you how we've sort of developed this tree that you see there as an image in black and white on purpose, because they're just ideas right now. And we'll be working on populating this as an intervention Western world toolkit. We're looking for the right terminology here. That's why it's in quotations. And Mitos, miyoyawin. It's Cree, Michif, and I apologize for my pronunciation, but I do try really hard to get it right. Tree of Wellness. And this is likely going to shift. And that's something that I think is really important to say at the outset. So often when we do research, we're like, okay, this is our proposal, here's what we're going to do, and then we're going to get to the end. But we have to be very open to, as we build relationship and we start working on these things, that there's opportunity to evolve, which is where the participatory action research methodology comes in really, really nicely, because we can kind of tweak things as we go. But this is where we're at right now. We're at the start of 1 year of 5 years of this work. And we're likely going to have a different name for this. We're just going through the process of pipe ceremony and working with the diverse communities that are on our team. So you can see here the community partnerships. We've got about 8 communities of all varying levels of readiness, if you want to use that term. Isle La Crosse has been a community I've worked with for almost 20 years. So we are super excited to kind of launched with Isle Across and James Smith Cree Nation. We're figuring out kind of how we're going to work in this context, because as we wrote this grant was the year that the community of James Smith Cree Nation experienced tremendous trauma with the stabbings that happened, and they're still working through so much. And as we partner on these research projects, creating openness to say, is this the right time? Just because it's written in a proposal doesn't mean that this is carved in stone and we need to do this. So this is all part of the relational approach, is to come in and out. Clearwater River Dene Nation is a community that I've been working with pretty closely for the last 2 or 3 years, and so we're working on having that community also as one of our initial starts. And then we've got a couple of new communities to us, so we're building a relationship. But when we look at intervention science and intervention research, and we think about scale and spread over time, we want to invite communities who have interest early, so they can be part of the conversations, they can see what's happening, they can look at the strengths that they already have in their own community and already start thinking about doing their own things within the programs and initiatives that are often already functioning. So these aren't anything new, but we're just trying to leverage and support the emergence of Indigenous worldview from across diverse Indigenous perspectives. So we have Cree, Métis, and Dene, people who were part of think tanks that happened as we built the grant. So that's really an amazing process. So the CIHR team created a 2-stage grant process, and the think tanks allowed us to bring in community perspectives, voice, worldview, right at the development stage of the grant. So we didn't have to get the grant and then revisit and tweak. However, it was such a quick turnaround. Like, I think we had 6 to 8 months from the time of receiving some letter of intent, early stage 1 funding, to actually pulling the grant together. So we will be, and I'll talk about this, re-engaging with community again, saying, okay, here's the research objectives and questions that we proposed. Now what? You want to keep them? You want to get rid of them? Want new? And that's all part of the relational participatory action kind of process. So yeah, I won't talk too much more on this slide, but it gives you an idea of the ongoing engagement and recruitment that we will be undertaking as we go here. So these were the think tank questions in stage 1 of our grant development, and we didn't get to all of them. I'm really curious about the last one, but we never got to it. And that might be just maybe our next grant, perhaps. But the first ones are all about, what do we need to know from First Nation Métis people? What is important to community when we're considering culturally safe and responsive health promotion, type 2 diabetes prevention approaches? What models of resilience and wellness will inform? And the resilience word was a term that was a CIHR term, and we've received a lot of critique from community on whether or not that's the right word. So that's one of the first things that we're actually going to unpack is, if it's not resilience, what is it? And how do we understand it better? And then how do community, First Nation Métis community members and peoples conceptualize and define effective pediatric type 2 diabetes prevention approaches and effectiveness measures? How are we measuring success? And that's part of the tree, which I'll loop back to right away. So I'm not even going to talk about the last one. But so we have the think tank discussions as results that informed our bigger grant. We have visual storyboards. We had a Métis artist work with us as we developed these. And there's broad themes that came up. And I'll just say very specifically, intergenerational, land-based, culturally responsive, strength-based messaging will absolutely be essential. And it's not a surprise. The really interesting thing for me with the youth is this idea of bringing in youth leadership training and advocacy, skill training in a health promotion intervention, and really supporting young Indigenous youth and to know what their rights are, recognize their human rights and how they advocate for that when they hit the health system, particularly those individuals who may be experiencing and living with type 2 diabetes already at a young age, and how they can go in and be part of the team rather than just being told. So that was a big one that actually came out. of our think tanks. These are some examples of the storyboards that came out of our data. And so these are visuals that are very, very valued by community partners, because rather than a written report, sometimes it's just having these stories that come out in visual context. And so even in the data that we're collecting, we are trying to decolonize how we think about what constitutes data, and how do we theme it, how do we work, and then how does it support communities to really continue to move forward with community-driven priorities. And Dr. Joanne Koppel's part of our team. She's a nephrologist. She did a presentation. So that was what was really interesting, is a lot of us came in saying, we want to hear from Indigenous community members. Like, what do you want to see in this grant? And they're like, well, we actually want to hear from the experts. And we're like, well, we're not the experts, but there's this really interesting reciprocal back and forth that communities want to know what is important to messaging so they can bring some of the youth into some of those teachings. They want to know who of their youth are at risk of developing chronic conditions such as type 2 diabetes. So that was really intriguing to me, and I think that is truly the middle ground of how do we bring these different perspectives and worldview together to create something that's relevant and meaningful for community, but also informs how we do research and how we can, and honestly learn with and by each other to create new knowledge. So this was just another storyboard that got created. So I'm going to fly through these because I want to make sure that I've got time to talk about kehokatowin, which is the other project that I just want to touch on really quickly. I don't have too many slides for that one. But so this is the visual art that Métis artist Leah Dorian and the Métis graphic artist Kim Vizzy-Carmen supported us to develop, and these sort of were front and center in our grant, and they talk a little bit about the key themes that came out of the different think tank questions that we asked. And again, you can see here intergenerational youth leadership advocacy. Spirituality was huge. We don't often think about that spirituality in healthcare necessarily. I think about my practice as a physio. It's not something we necessarily have the top of mind, and how important that actually is to ensure that through spirituality and the teachings that come with it in community, these are some of the pieces that the older adults want to see the younger generations honor, absorb, and take in, because they're strong lessons from ancestors around wellness and how to be well and how to stay healthy. So, and then lots came up about anti-racism among healthcare providers. So that might be something that we'll try to offer opportunities for as we do this grant with the research team members that we have. This was a combo of think tank number 2 and 3, and looking at the models of wellness. We got rid of the word resilience because it just wasn't the right word at the time. And reclaiming culture, finding and achieving balance, take back our power. That was a big thing, and it's all about self-determination, community-driven priorities as the absolute top of everything, and then we respond. And we offer different things that we each bring as an interdisciplinary, interprofessional team of leads and health and research teams, but ultimately just trying to do it in a different way. And then this was think tank number 4. What do Indigenous youth? So we talked to a group of youth, some of whom live with type 2 diabetes. There was one participant, 11 years old, who was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes when they were 10, and they had no idea that both their parents had type 2 diabetes. It was not talked about. And so there's this really getting into what we kind of, and I call sort of like a harm reduction approach, but trying to come up with normalizing conversation around what this means, because there's so much negative emotion and shame around these conditions in communities, and of course technology. How do we use technology to keep young people across the province communicating and hearing from each other, sharing truths about health? So this is Mitos, miyoyawin, an idea, black and white. It's going to grow and it's going to develop. But I want to point out really quickly a few important things. So the essential knowledge is in the roots of the tree, and it grounds everything. The branches of the tree are the key pillars, or perhaps areas of priority that communities may want to choose from. And there may be branches that we haven't even thought of yet and community members haven't shared with us yet. But land-based, intergenerational, youth leadership, anti-racism, anti-oppression, and this idea of connection to the land and environmental stewards for food and water sovereignty among the young people who will become the leaders in the community. So it's very much around that, and it brings in the breath of life theory substantively, and is trying to, in the middle there you can see we're trying to create this ethical space for our work together. And then really important for me, and what I'm really interested in, is identifying how do we know these interventions are successful with community. Yes, we have Western metrics, but what's important, how do community members know that their youth are well? What are the indicators of wellness? So we've got berries, seeds, and flowers that represent the metrics or the measures that we'll co-create and learn about as we develop this with community partners. So we've got lots of work to do, but it's pretty exciting. So that's we're launching into that. And just as an FYI, one of the first things that we're doing in April is I'm facilitating a workshop for the research team to come together and do a co-creation of decolonizing space and research. And what we'll do there is actually create some guiding principles, terms of reference, accountabilities that all of us on the team are aware of. We create them together, grounded in anti-oppression, anti-racism, transformational kind of cultural humility, and that we will always use that as our backbone to always practicing in as good a way as possible and always come back to that. So we're grounding that right from the start. Do no harm is going to be a big deal, and it's a big team, and we're going to have grad students. So got to make sure that we're doing our due diligence to act with integrity and respect right from the beginning. So this is just a real quick slide of some of the people who are involved, and really excited to be launching this project with the team that I have. I feel tremendous gratitude for the number of people who have passion for this work. So quickly, it's 12:33. I'm not doing too bad. I think I can wrap this up in 7 minutes. We'll see. So kehokatowin, this is a project that is dear to my heart. It comes off of a previous CHR-funded project called Waskawitan, and a SSHRF-funded project, Taniganawak. SSHRF is Saskatchewan Health Research Foundation. And we learned it's Métis-specific and Métis-driven. Kehokatowin means visiting, gathering, and sharing. And Liz DeRoche or TJ Roy are co-leads with Heather Folds and Sylvia Abney. Sylvia and I have worked closely with Liz and TJ for at least 10 years on other work. And this is a photograph of Isle La Crosse, the community of Isle La Crosse in northern Saskatchewan. Heather Folds is new to our team, although I work with her in other areas, and she's a Métis scholar, faculty member in the College of Kinesiology at the University of Saskatchewan. And then we've got a whole team of geographers and medical anthropologists and who else? All sorts of other people. Kehokatowin, Northern Saskatchewan Métis gathering here and there to age well in places. And there's an S there for a reason. I won't read this. It's just what grounds. This was a quote that was at the very top and the vision of our grant proposal. And we actually wrote the proposal around a poem that was written by Métis poet, Rita Bouvier, who actually we often communicate with her and work with her closely. She lives in Saskatoon. She's an educator, but has a house in her grandmother's house up in Isle La Crosse. But it's Kehokatowin is all about visiting, passing on knowledge, no matter where people are. And it's in urban spaces, rural locations and land-based spaces that we will be really trying to look at from a strength-based perspective. Often we think about in healthcare, I think, the transiency and the challenges that come with rural remote health. But individuals are having to access and move to urban spaces for different reasons, and we want to unpack what those are. While they're there, they're always trying to figure out how to maintain language connection, land to the land, the food, all of that. So, and again, it's very Métis-centric. This just gives you a little bit of how we drew this project from Waskawaiten and Taniganawak. Transportation, caregiving, and loneliness came up as big themes, and they challenged the wellness and health across the lifespan. And that there's often people moving in between homes and spaces, as I noted, between northern communities and lands and urban centers for a number of reasons. Some are in response to the impacts of colonization, but others are for opportunities to support family and friends. It's not always negative or deficit. It's often there's other strength-based reasons for it. Being well in place is actually multi-local, and it's a choice. Individuals are choosing, Métis community members are choosing to move and live in these many spaces. And for those of you who have done work with Indigenous communities in Manitoba, I think some of this will probably resonate because it seems to be something that comes up in the readings that I do. And this tremendous desire for connection. So intergenerational land-based, also part of this work. So this is, we also are just launching this. It's the start of a 4-year project. And the objectives are looking at revealing how multi-locality currently shapes well-being of diverse Métis youth and adults in and across kind of 3 spaces loosely, but Northern Home Community, which is the orange, Northern Ancestral Lands, which is the blue dotted lines, and the city of Saskatoon, and looking at how Métis youth and adults aspire to achieve wellness through a multi-local lived reality. We will be recruiting youth, a youth advisory circle as we do this, and they'll be closely linked with knowledge keepers, elders, who are also Métis. And then objective C is identify interventions that are available and emerging that support multi-local Métis youth and adult well-being in and across places. What I love and I'm excited about are the group and the collaborators and the relationships that we have. So Seketawak Elders Group is a group of older adults. In Isle Across, we've worked with this community group for like at least 10 years, and they have such strong focus of where they want to go and how they want to support the youth. The Village of Isle Across, of course. Elder Louise Olkey, who is a collaborator with us. She's a Métis elder. And what I'm also very excited about is Miyoyawin Valley Authority. So if you ever visit Saskatoon, the River Valley is actually governed and maintained and stewarded by the Miyoyawin Valley Authority. There's a Métis, Andrea LaFonda, Métis Executive Director, leading, and they want to do a ton of land-based teachings with young people and elders. So we've got the Saskatoon Public School Division and the Greater Saskatoon Catholic Schools as part of this. And we are, as all the teachers are in the midst of job action in Saskatchewan because the government needs to step it up a bit, we are again being really thoughtful about how much do we do with the teachers and the school divisions at this point. How do we act in solidarity with them, with the priorities? And because they're basically, one of their initiatives, just to put this plug in, is this type of work that we want to do is what is not getting funded by our education system. So it would be really, I think, disrespectful for us to say, hey, we're going to do this, and I know you're on strike, but. So we're navigating some of the political stuff there. And then Saskatoon Indian Métis Friendship Center, Rayla Liberty, and his team there. And this is going to be, so Friendship Center and Miyoyawin Valley Authority work closely together. And my time, one more minute. They're also going to support us to really leverage what they're already doing to get and meet and connect with hard-to-reach populations who actually access the River Valley quite a bit, some of whom are without a home at this point, some are living with food insecurity, and so figuring out how what this looks like. So we're just starting. And maybe I'll come back in a year or two and I can give you an update. But this is the team here. Sylvia Abney and I in the middle, and then Liz and TG on the outside, and Heather Folds. But recognition of, and Veronica McKinney actually is part of both of our projects, and she's Métis, Cree Métis, and the director of Northern Medical Services. So she's really passionate about partnering on these as well. So I will leave it there, and happy I got through all my stuff in 40 minutes. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for your time. Yeah, wow, I didn't notice how many people were online.
Lots of people online.
Yeah.
So we do have some time specifically for questions. And I think, Leanne, you can help us if somebody puts their hand up and wants to speak through Zoom and ask a question, or the chat line. I do have a question for you. I'm wondering if you can talk about how you navigate our colonial processes of CHR funding and that kind of processes when you say, oh, everything is iterative. We're gonna change the objectives.
It's tricky.
Can you comment on that?
Absolutely. And I think what I will first say is that CIHR has done a ton of work, particularly in the Institute of Indigenous Peoples' Health, to create openness for this type of participatory action research. So we have to articulate things, and we explain this in and with community, that we'll draw things, we'll sort of put it into the jargon and the language that we know that the review committees are going to be looking at. Interestingly, with our Mitos, miyoyawin Strong Bodies project, they had knowledge keepers as part of the review team. So I think that's phenomenal, because I think often Indigenous reviewers will likely see through, if things just aren't quite authentic or quite solidly there, or they'll see teams trying to start and do things in a different way. So I think that's part of it. For us, the other really important thing about CHR funding is that we actually have quite a bit of flexibility once the funding has been awarded to, as long as line items aren't changed, to change our research questions based on the needs of community. But this is why the stage 1 was essential for the Team Diabetes grant, because we had community input right from the start. And that is one of the biggest things that is really important, and I think essential to putting these types of grants forward. And then it's the relationship and the conversations. And I will often, we just buffer, and we, as the leads and the researchers, on how do we do this so that we're not putting burden on community. But it's partly the funding structure, I think, allows us to do that. But the relationships at the beginning, essential, receiving input. Often, one of the first CHR funded projects that I referred to, Waskawetan, it took us 2 years to write that, because we were at a beginning stage of a relationship, and it was back and forth, iterative. The other thing is support from your institution. So I actually was able to convince our Office of the Vice Dean of Research to infuse a little bit of funding to allow us to travel in and out. And I mean, they're super excited because, of course, it paid off, right? And it doesn't always, but it allowed us to show and demonstrate our commitment to the relationship, to hearing what they say, put it into the research thing, take it back, read it with them again. So it's not that I write it and it goes in, it's tons of iterative back and forth. And I sat down with the diabetes grant, actually, with one of the knowledge keepers, and we just walked through it. And Gilbert, he's like, I like that, take that out, I don't like that. And then we change it up. So that's the other way. But it's community being part of every part of it. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah.
And a lot of cultural humility on the researcher's part.
Tons, especially when we're saying, what metrics will this be? So we make suggestions. That's the other thing, is you can't just be oh, I don't know what we're going to measure. We'll figure it out. Because reviewers will be like, well, that's ridiculous. You need to put something on paper. So what we do is we're very careful about what we say to community. Say, look, we're going to put these things in because I think it'll get us the funds. It'll give, a really good, rigorous approach to showing how we want to measure this. But just keep in mind, like, we are open to thinking about these metrics in a completely different way as we figure it out. So it's that as well. Yeah.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
Any questions from here? I can repeat it if there's not a. Is there an extra microphone here? I can repeat your question, Sandra.
I'm just wondering about if there's any rehab students involved or any plans for that, either through the professional programs or as masters, PhD students.
So
yes,
the question is,
are
there any opportunities to include students either at entry level or postgraduate level to integrate students into the work that you do?
Such a great question. And absolutely, yes, both MPT and grad students. I'm very, very thoughtful about writing into the budget and the actual project of how this is actually supporting and informing interprofessional education pillars as we go. So this segues directly with sending physio students as some of their clinical practicums into Isle Across, but other communities. Indigenous communities are so keen to have physio students. It's unbelievable. As soon as they hear there's one community doing it, people are like, well, why aren't we doing that? So that actually is going to be an interesting sort of secondary thing that's just going to be happening as we go, that we want to be thoughtful about measuring, impact, et cetera, on the learning. And as we do the decolonizing workshops and all that, we will absolutely be inviting physio students into all of it. I look for how to join the dots. Are there things that we can loop in to be an assignment in one of the classes? Are there volunteer hours that students want? So we do that. And then we have grad students. So we've got graduate funding through this. We are very thoughtful and looking to initiate with recruiting Indigenous scholars first and foremost. But I'm a non-Indigenous scholar, and I was trained within a CIHR-funded program that was called the Networks of Environment for Indigenous Health Research. And at that time, I was one of few non-Indigenous students in there. And I learned a ton, and I was like, ooh, is this my space? Should I be here? Having those conversations with the funders. But what I learned there has been absolutely critical to what I bring into my work now. And so I do have a commitment for reconciling how do we have these conversations with Indigenous researchers, non-Indigenous researchers, and now how do we train the next generation of researchers to have these conversations and do these things, so that this for me is not just a research project. It is truly how are we just going to take advantage and the opportunity to leverage as much as we can. And it can't be done. I can't do it by myself. So it has to be done with a team. And I just feel, like I say, very grateful because I've got a lot of people who are on board around me. But it's an awesome question. And I will just recommend to anyone writing up any types of grants, like if you're working in the rehab school, just put it in as a line item and bring it in as an interprofessional or whatever training for physio students, because it's opportunities. Then they get their flavor of research, but they're also, from a professional practice, learning a ton. Yeah.
Your passion is so palpable. Oh my goodness. Other questions? There's a question, Gil Restall.
Hi, Sarah. Thanks so much for your presentation. I really appreciate it. Love to hear about your projects. I am an occupational therapist, and I'm currently a co-principal investigator on a project that's looking at people who are living, First Nations people who are living with HIV. And I'm quite interested in your ideas around multi-local well-being. Um, that's certainly something that is fairly common in Manitoba as well as Saskatchewan. And one of the reasons that this the multi-locality occurs is really forced by colonial systems, right, of healthcare, where a lot of the resources in healthcare are very centralized in our case, Winnipeg. And so people are forced in many ways, not by to move to Winnipeg, for example, when they have a chronic health condition because of the availability of resources. I'm just wondering about some of your ideas about that tension of multi-locality and well-being and the influence of the colonial structures that really limit the choices of people for where they live.
Yeah, well, and I agree. Those impacts of colonization definitely play out and create this, as you say, a tension for many individuals who are seeking relevant, timely care, et cetera, especially chronic conditions with exacerbations here and there. I think that what we've heard from community is that this mobility and the movement and the multi-local is actually to its strength base. So for example, like I'm thinking of people who are on dialysis and having to relocate to an urban location to receive dialysis. There's many people from their family or their friend circles who will bring fish from mile across to them, or will make sure that they can get them home for periods of time here and there. And so the tensions exist, create this disruption, and actually increase stress, which we know then is impacting health conditions negatively. So it perpetuates, it's sort of the self-perpetuating cycle. And so what our project is hoping to look at and create and make visible are recommendations for how do we ensure when people have to spend time, Métis people, what is it that they need that they're actually resourcing on the fly and just off the cuff, and people are kind of just mulling around supporting, and how can we take some of those things that are happening and formalize it and make them usual practice. So it becomes a little bit easier, even if we can't figure out the access to care piece necessarily, that we're at least figuring out what are the supports, what are the networks, what are the things. It may even be, who do you contact when you're there? I imagine Winnipeg, similarly to Saskatoon, we've got health navigators, but aside from that, you know, who in the community, where do you go to do a smudge? Where do you go to just spend time on the land? And one of the things that came up actually that we'll also be looking at is this idea of walking. And walking in and on the lands in rural places is very different as an Indigenous person walking in urban spaces. There's all sorts of other really negative things that can come up that are grounded in racism and discrimination and that sort of thing. So I don't know if I answered your question, but it sounds like, wow, yeah, there's tremendous parallels. And hopefully, as we bring out the strengths of what it means to live in multi-local places, we can inform, whether it be interventions or policies on how do we now fully support people who are choosing to live in multi-local places. Ideally, yeah, let's get the care to where the people are. I mean, that's a human right. And I know there's tons happening around virtual care and that sort of thing, but yeah. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you. It's certainly a tension and not easily resolved for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, good question. I appreciate where you're coming from. Hey, Patty.
Just invite her.
Patty, would you like to ask your question.
Yeah. Sarah, this was really beautiful work. So thank you for sharing it. I want to come to your comment about MPT students and embedding them in your grants. And I just wanted you to maybe speak to I'm curious if they're like going on research placements in community, like they're part of the participatory action research when they go, or if they're going as physio students on placements. Because I think those are different things. If they're going in research roles, what in your curriculum is supporting them doing that? Because I just have the sense that evidence-based practice has been very statistical for them. Like it's very systematic review. There's a lot of, I'm speaking to my own hesitancy about embedding MPT students in my own projects as a qualitative researcher. So I wondered if you could speak to that.
It is definitely tricky, and it's something that we've thought long and hard about. So we actually do a couple things, Patty. They're generally going up into the community as clinical learners, not in a health facility though, in the community. And there's community members that they liaise with and they work directly with. And they're under the umbrella often of the research project. Now, this could evolve as we work with diverse communities, but for now, this is kind of the model that we're working with, and it's really fluid. So if you like certainty, it's kind of hard, but what we do is they're spending time engaging in the activities and the relational practice of what's underpinning our work. And as they hear, they might support a focus group, they might support, going and spending time in the Sikituwak Elders Lodge. Often they're helping cook. They might, I've had a student who sewed a ribbon skirt, others who've gone fishing. They'll do things as activities in the community, spending time. It's almost ethnographic. And as they spend time, they're doing a reflection, and they're asked to connect what they're learning to what it means for them as a physical therapist, and what does that look like? And then we have lots of conversations. The other piece is that they may implement pilot interventions that are driven and grounded and kind of under the umbrella of the research, and they're generally health promotion interventions. For example, the community in the past has said, hey, could you run a walking group? We've got people in the community who want to walk, and that's a task. Could you take the leadership of that? And it's been amazing, because there's been some students who are like, they create a binder and they've got all this stuff, and then nobody shows up, and they're like, Sarah, nobody showed up. I'm like, okay, now what are you going to do? And then they figure out how they're engaging with community. And they're like, if you'd given me that as an assignment in class, and then I brought you my binder and I said, throw it in the garbage, we would have been so mad at you. I'm like, I know, right? But yeah, so it's a little bit hybrid, I think, is maybe my best answer to that. And it's a little bit of, initially, I would be happy to talk more with you, Patty, about this, but initially I think finding a student that you really do feel is the right student, who's open and comfortable with this, and then you try a few things and it kind of forms. It's actually the process of doing it that leads to developing the outcome. And then I often get the students to create orientation binders while they're there, so that the next student, because it's all about really critical and essential pre-orientation. Before students go in, I spend quite a bit of time with them, and we do some pre-orientation, pre-departure orientation stuff. So yeah, it's a bit of a hybrid, if that answers your question. But I appreciate your hesitancy with it, and your thoughtfulness about doing it in a good way.
All right, I think we're going to have to wrap things up. Thanks everyone for your wonderful questions today, and thank you, Sarah, for making the effort to drive to Winnipeg in the winter, and for really sharing your passion and your expertise and your experiences with your research in and with Indigenous communities with us. It's really great to see somebody who's had the success that you've had with CIHR, and I think it's really nice for us to make connections between Manitoba and Saskatchewan, so that more of this type of research can take place. Thanks
Yeah.
very much.
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks to all of you who've joined virtually. Maybe I'll see you live in person one day, but thanks for those who are here for joining. Appreciate the invite.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks, everybody.
Take care.